You ever wonder how something like a simple traffic ticket can somehow be connected to the powerful court in the United States? Well, today we're going to break down the entire U.S. judicial branch, one of the most important pillars of American democracy. We're going to follow the path all the way from your local courthouse to the steps of the Supreme Court.
I mean, think about it. Imagine you're playing a game. You've got this super detailed rule book, but there's no referee. What happens when players disagree on a rule? You get total chaos, right? And that, right there, is the fundamental problem our court system was built to solve.
And this wasn't just some what-if scenario. The founders of the United States faced this exact disaster under their first attempt at a government, the Articles of Confederation. With no national court, states were constantly fighting over things like borders and trade. There was just no neutral referee to call the shots, and it was a massive weakness for the new country.
So, learning from that huge mistake, the founders built the solution right into Article 3 of the Constitution. These words are so powerful. They created one Supreme Court and gave Congress the green light to build out a whole system of lower federal courts, finally giving the country the referees it desperately needed.
So here's our game plan for today. We'll kick things off by understanding the two parallel court systems running in the U.S. Then we're going to climb the federal ladder, take a look at how a state system is set up, and unpack the court's biggest power, judicial review. And finally, we'll tie it all together and see why this stuff matters to every single one of us.
All right, let's dive into a really foundational concept. Right now, in the United States, you're living under two different court systems at the exact same time, one for the entire country and one for your specific state. And this is what that dual system looks like in action. You've got the federal courts on one track, and their power stretches across the whole nation. But running right alongside it, every single state has its own, separate court system, just like the one you see here for Florida. They work side by side, but handle totally different kinds of cases.
So how do they split up the work? The magic word here is jurisdiction. It's just a fancy term for a court's authority to hear and decide a case. And I love this little fact. The words Latin roots, jus and dictio, literally mean to declare the law. That's what jurisdiction is all about.
And here's how that plays out. Federal courts deal with the big national stuff, cases that involve the U.S. Constitution, federal laws, or maybe a lawsuit between two states. But the state courts? They handle the huge volume of day-to-day legal issues. Everything from that traffic ticket we talked about, to family law, to the majority of criminal trials. Okay, one more key distinction we've got to make is how a court hears a case. I want you to think of a court with original jurisdiction like a chef. This is the first court to hear the case. It takes all the raw ingredients, the evidence, the testimony, and creates a final verdict. Now, a court with appellate jurisdiction is more like a food critic. It doesn't cook a new meal. It just looks at the dish the chef already made to see if the recipe, the law, was followed correctly. Now that we've got those types of jurisdiction down, let's see how they actually work inside the federal system. We're going to climb the ladder, starting right at the bottom and going all the way to the top. And the federal system is actually pretty simple. It's a three-level pyramid. A case will usually start at the bottom, and if someone appeals, it can work its way up. So let's start at the base. The foundation of this whole pyramid is the U.S. district courts. There are 94 of them spread out across the country, and these are the main trial courts. This is where federal cases get started. You've got witnesses, evidence, juries. This is where the action is. These are the chefs of the federal system. So what if you lose your case in a district court, and you think the judge made a legal mistake? Well, you can appeal to the next level up, the U.S. Circuit Courts of Appeals. There are 13 of these circuits. Here, there's no jury, no new evidence. Instead, a panel of judges acts like those food critics, just reviewing the trial to make sure the law was applied right. And at the very top, the peak of the pyramid, you have the U.S. Supreme Court. This is it, the court of last resort. Its 9 justices have the absolute final say on matters of federal law. Most of what they do is appellate, reviewing cases from lower courts, but their decision, no matter what, is final. Okay, so we've climbed the federal ladder. Now let's jump over to that parallel state track. Now, every state's system is a little different, but we're going to use Florida as our example because its 4-level structure is a pretty common setup you'll see around the country. And what do you know? It looks pretty familiar, right? It's another pyramid. The main difference here is that the federal system we just looked at has 3 main tiers, but Florida's has 4. Let's do a quick flyby. At the bottom, you've got county courts. They're often called the people's courts because they handle tons of smaller cases like traffic tickets. A step up, you have the circuit courts.
the main trial courts for more serious crimes and big lawsuits. If you want to appeal a decision from there, you go to the District Courts of Appeal. And at the very top, the Florida Supreme Court is the final word on Florida's state laws.
All right, now let's talk about what is without a doubt the most important power any court in the U.S. has. It's called judicial review, and it's the ultimate check that the entire judicial branch has on the president and Congress.
So what is it? Judicial review is the power to look at any law or any action by the government and strike it down if it violates the Constitution. But here's the wild part. This power isn't actually written down anywhere in the Constitution. The Supreme Court basically gave itself this power in a legendary 1803 case called Marbury versus Madison. It was an absolute game changer that shaped the balance of power in America forever.
Okay, let's put this into practice. Quick scenario for you. A state passes a law that bans a certain book from every school library. A student sues, saying the law violates their rights, and the case makes it all the way to the Supreme Court. What judicial process is the court using here?
If you said judicial review, you are spot on. See, the court isn't trying to figure out if the student is guilty or innocent. They are putting the law itself on trial. They're checking to see if it clashes with the highest law in the land, the Constitution. In this case, the First Amendment's protection of free speech.
So we've covered the structure, the jurisdictions, the massive power of the courts. Let's bring it all home and answer the biggest question of all. Why does any of this even matter to you?
At the end of the day, the Constitution is basically a promise of rights, but promises can be broken. The courts are designed to be the guardians of that promise. They're there to make sure laws are applied fairly to everyone and to give us a peaceful way to solve our biggest disagreements. This system is where your individual rights are supposed to be defended.
So the courts are the final referees, the ultimate interpreters of the law. They have the last word, which leaves us with one last really big question to think about. If the courts are the ones making sure everyone else is following the rules, who's making sure the courts are following the rules?